And good morning, everyone. Appreciate you bringing in the federal community that has an interest in DevOps. My name's Brian Fox. Peter is a more permanent part of this along I-95 group. I actually grew up on the East Coast. I'm from Connecticut originally. I grew up in Minnesota and Connecticut, so it's fun to see that there's a Connecticut DevOps meetup group as well. Otherwise, Peter and I, we co-lead a DevOps community of practice within the federal government, and it's loosely aligned with the 18F and TTS, or Technology Transformation Services Guild. So we have a guild that's internal to 18F, spread lessons learned and just allow us all to learn from internally from one another, but then to help bring the community together across all of federal government. We also co-lead this community of practice. And over the past year or so, we've been doing that. It's been doing really well. And so today we're bringing in a couple of presenters as well. And Peter and I are also going to be sharing two services or products that we're personally involved in within the federal government. But if you all are interested in the DevOps community of practices within the federal government, if you go to digital.gov/communities/DevOps, you'll see our website, a list of past meetings, which includes all the past stuff, and there is video content available there, as well as upcoming meetings, which would include, in June, we're going to have the U.S. Air Force's Logistics and Training Group, known as COOL, which is an acronym. I'm forgetting what that acronym stands for, but anyway, we meet monthly for just a half hour, so we meet pretty quickly. We have a public Slack channel and also a listserv, which has had a lot of traffic. And you can just find out more about us and what we're up to here. But you all are welcome to join. We have a terrific interest in bringing folks together, including academia and industry, to be a part of that, with really the goal of spreading lessons learned across all of federal government to reduce that learning curve, and kind of on a, what would you call, a psychological or maybe even emotional level, is encourage and spread the courage to change. That adopting these methods, adopting these technologies may be scary for an individual or an individual team or an individual office, but if offices and agencies are seeing that others are adopting it, it's a heck of a lot easier to start taking those new and innovative practices and adopting them yourself, especially if you've learned something from maybe a federal partner to your left and right. So anyway, that's the goal of what we're doing. And so it's really terrific to be brought in on what you all are doing just within the DC and East Coast space. Peter, anything else to add from a DevOps cop standpoint?
I think you've covered it. You always give me too much credit when you call me a co-lead. I sometimes help out. It's really been great to have you take the reins and guide this beast. So
excellent.
I think that covers it.
Otherwise, Peter, if you don't mind, I'm going to kick off with a little bit of login.gov, and then I'll hand over to you about cloud. How's that sound?
Yeah, go for it.
Great. And then we're going to hand off to Jeremy. Go ahead and go into present mode here. Everyone seeing my screen okay? Peter, are you seeing my screen okay?
It's good.
Excellent. So my day job at GSA and 18F is working with the login.gov product team. And login.gov, our goal is really to provide a digital front door for government agencies. Login.gov is providing multi-factor authentication and ID proofing. If you're familiar with the NIST 800-63 standards. That would be IAL1 and IAL2. Just a brief history. It's really about providing that simplified, secure access for the public and employees within the federal government for a reduced cost, to the agencies and obviously to the taxpayers. This product started within 18F and we've continued to grow across the federal government as far as providing that. And our mission, simplify that secure access to online federal services for the public. And here's kind of the problem statement. Why would the federal government and the public need something like login.gov? Before login.gov, everyone was taking on the development costs and mission of authentication, that sign on. And that creates a lot of duplicative accounts. It's expensive because each agency and department is doing it on their own. And as such, they're focusing on things that are outside of their mission area and core competency. So inconsistent and dated user experiences. And as the graphic is showing there, everybody kind of doing it on their own there, sporadic, right? So after login.gov with a consistent capability that's constantly evolving to improve not just the user experience, but also to mitigate issues associated with the evolving threat and the evolving standards coming out of NIST, right? And so then just providing that to federal government and then allowing those organizations to focus back in on their core competencies. And we, deliver that identity, requires a bit of balance between security, privacy, and usability. You can see what we're delivering there as far as identity proofing, easy integration, also competitive pricing, and trusted partnerships with our various groups. There's a bit of the workflow, and as well as ID proofing. So we're doing that as well. We're meeting those NIST standards. And we are up to over 20 agencies. We have about 23 million users coming through login.gov. And we continue to grow. I'm actually working with the partnership team. So really kind of sales engineer, helping those government federal partners understand how to integrate with us. And we've got a lot of interest because this is a growing need across government, again, both on the system security as well as folks are interested in an improved user experience and that user interface. And if anyone is interested in contacting us, so if anyone in the group here is interested, feel free to just reach out, partners@login.gov, and we have a Slack channel as well, and you can always reach out on the web too and take a look there at partners.login.gov. All right, thanks so much, and I'm going to stop sharing. Peter, if you want to go ahead and run through yours.
Yeah, I'm just also going to point out that a fair bit of what Login does is open source. I'm currently relying on some of their Terraform examples because they have that pretty well worked out. So we can both provide secure services to the public and do a lot of that work in the open in a way that people can learn from and reuse and improve. We want to make comments on it.
Peter, let me just add, thanks for actually kind of going there, because speaking of communities, in July, I'm going to be kicking off an identity community. And the first folks that are going to be presenting is NGA on their efforts around Keycloak. If you have an interest in that, just ping me at brian.fox@gsa.gov, and I'll get you in on the calendar note and share with you. Again, that's brian.fox@gsa.gov. So we're going to be kicking off an identity community as well. So yeah, Peter, go ahead.
Okay. And So I'm just going to provide a few slides about cloud.gov, which is among the places I've worked at 18F. I love that for someone like myself who needs this change of pace like every year or so, I've been able to get that change of pace without actually having to change jobs. And I was with cloud.gov for a year and a half, went back and did some consulting, and I've been back there again for the last 6 months in the role as the security and compliance lead, which has been a really interesting education or re-education for me. I've done security and compliance work before, and it's great fun to be back in it. Let me bother. Well, we'll just go with this view. The cloud.gov was created about 4 or 5 years ago when teams at 18F were working with their federal partners, and it continually came up against this wall where they were unable to have any access to the basic building blocks you need to build a digital service, a web server, app server, backend database, and like a Redis or Elasticsearch, and ability to control DNS. And even if they were able to get that, they weren't able to release to it at the cadence that a product team needs. And as you know, it's not in DevOps. We want to practice this lean development methodology where you build out a concept iteratively, put it in front of the people who need to see it, get feedback, and cycle through that. So much of the federal process is built on this idea, like you build it once, release it, and don't touch it, which is like saying software build is like saying the yard is mowed. It's not a one-time thing. You have to do it over and over again. In fact, this is a nice example of iterative design going on within cloud.gov, of building out the FedRAMP Marketplace dashboard over the period of some months, where each changes out the features that are available on that dashboard until you have a fully working product. I just love this animated GIF as an example of iterative agile development. And so that's what cloud.gov is for. What is it? It is a platform as a service for public service. It's built on open source Cloud Foundry and built largely on top of AWS GovCloud. And our focus has been on not only making it easy for development product teams to use, but also to shorten the lift to compliance by baking in as much of the needed compliance ahead of time in terms of the number of NIST controls you have to satisfy. If there's 325 controls you need to satisfy for our FedRAMP FISMA moderate impact system, we provide as many as 269 of those out of the box that you can just inherit. And then you have 41 controls that you're fully responsible for yourself. So that means when it seems for most agencies that getting to the production in the cloud is difficult because you have all these technical requirements on the left-hand side and all the implementation requirements that and the technical requirements on the left are common everywhere in terms of the stack, the environments, the user management operations. But on top of that, in a regulated environment, there's all the steps for procuring, provisioning, auditing, the government security and compliance requirements that are not adequately addressed by industry. And often agencies aren't staffed appropriately to own and operate cloud infrastructure. So there's always the risk that they will outsource that and lose the key competencies that they actually need on the development teams, the product teams themselves, to understand what it is they're building for the agencies, for the citizens within this country. So with cloud.gov, the timeline to production can be a few weeks to get the agreement signed between the agency and the cloud.gov team. Spinning up services and can take seconds. The actual development work, well, that depends upon your team. With the reduced scope of what it is you're building on top of cloud.gov, the documentation and auditing is reduced to weeks or a month or so compared to building out everything yourself. And you have the ability to automate your deployments via the command line and operation in terms of high availability, either automatically managed or something that is a routine, simple operation for your team. We have a bunch of agencies and a growing number of them that are running services on cloud.gov. A few you may be familiar with. The Federal Election Commission. Not only have we saved them a lot of money for a small agency, $1.2 million each year, but they were able to go from quarterly release cycles to releasing as their product team needs, which is about every 2 weeks as they build things out. And we've been able to sustain the peaks that are needed every quarter as filing deadlines approach without the agency, without the commission having to have spare hardware just for those peaks. The FDIC publishes their bank takeovers on cloud.gov on Fridays, and they found us a reliable partner for that key aspect of managing the that component of our economy. And on top of cloud.gov, there's a brethren service called Federalist, which designed its software as a service for publishing websites, has a lot of features akin to Netlify, if you're familiar with that. And so in total right now, we support 47 different systems, 18 agencies on cloud.gov, 9 agencies on Federalist, and 134 websites and growing through that service. So that's a high-level overview of what we provide for government agencies. Some other time I'd love to drill down into the technology for a group like this, but it's time for me to turn over to Jeremy and then Chris. Unless, I think we have time for questions for myself or Brian about login or cloud.gov.
Any questions? All right. Otherwise, without further ado, over to Jeremy, who is going to present on the hero's journey. And this is just a wonderful presentation. He shared this with our community of practice. Gets in on kind of the softer areas of technical transformation. And many of you may know that as folks reskill, as organizations change, this hero's journey really maps to both. So it's not just on the individual, but also the organization.
Great. Can everyone see the screen? It should be the matrix.
Absolutely, Jeremy.
Great.
Yes.
Thanks for the introduction. And I'd also, there was something that Peter said that kind of resonated with what we're talking about. And it was the comment on the risk of agencies outsourcing certain kinds of competencies to manage their own infrastructure when they go to a cloud service provider. And that kind of gets into a lot of what I'm about to talk about in realizing that risk and trying to answer that call to adventure inside my own agency. So without further ado, there's this concept of the hero's journey. And for those who are not familiar, this is a quote that is kind of at the thesis of it, that a hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. And that's from Joseph Campbell, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. That thesis that he wrote about this is that this pattern of a story is embedded in humanity, in societies. And he studied thousands of different cultures and groupings of stories and found this pattern in it. And so there's something about this pattern that's embedded in us and it resonates with us. And we find it in some of the most powerful mythology and religion and things that really inspire society and humanity. And so I'm going to give a little bit about me, an overview of what a model is that we could use for reskilling our own digital talent. I'll give like an anecdote of my experience over that. And I don't know if we'll have time for Q&A, but there is some kind of inflection questions at the end that you can take away with this. And that's right, what you're seeing, the clock here. This is typically how we break down the story. 12 chapters at each hour, 3 real phases: the departure, the initiation, the return, and that there is like this chasm between what the known world is and what the unknown world is, and that adventure is out there in the unknown world. So you'll see as I progress through these slides, little icons and things that are kind of guiding us of where we are in that map. And a little bit about me. I'm from Florida. I grew up in Daytona. I was a lifeguard. I went to the Naval Academy, joined the Marine Corps as a lieutenant, did ground logistics operations in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, then became a technologist and did a tour in the Pentagon for 3 years, advising the CIO there for the Marine Corps. So quick overview of what I see as the problem. Our digital talent, it's hard to get, it's hard to keep. And we had this idea that, we can reskill our own workforce, and we already have them and we're in the best position to do it. So we found this model of the hero's journey, and it's interesting because it means we all have a role to play. The digital transformation and DevOps, it's not just an IT thing, it's the entire organization. There's a lot of cultural things that come with it. Everyone has a role to play. And the most interesting thing about the hero's journey that I find is that it's this call to adventure to go find this elixir that's out in the unknown. And the hero eventually, whether the hero is a person or a group of people, they go out there to find that elixir. And through the ordeal, they just find out that hidden secret sauce was in them the whole time. But it required going through that trial to be able to do that self-discovery and resurrect as the new form of themselves. And that's what's really magical about this, and what resonates, I think, with people is like those superhero powers are latent within us. We just have to awaken them. And so the idea would be taking this model, we would implement it to be able to know where we are in our own journeys as an individual or an organization, and then detecting those thresholds, the different chapters and the different phases, and looking for those moments of where we can pull ourselves and each other through to get to that next level and to keep leveling up. As Brian said earlier, it's like mowing a lawn. This cycle, you do it, I think it was Peter too, you have to iterate on it. And like that was, one of the things that also resonated this morning. And then the utility of this conversation is to help you tell your story. So as you find that you are the one calling people to adventure, I mean, if you're here, if you're doing DevOps and you're here in the I-95 corridor, I mean, you're already answering the call. So this is also to kind of help you, hey, telling the story this way will resonate with people. Try to use this pattern to wake them up. And in the context of DevOps, and what are we talking about, digital talent and reskilling people, Amplitude, their consultants had a really good diagram here of what are we talking about. And it's taking these waterfall teams of the software development lifecycle and trying to get them to this product team model where they're autonomous in their cross-functional collaboration with each other. So my story is about starting out in a waterfall organization in the Marine Corps. And we got up to the point where we were doing like that 3rd or 4th level where we became an agile team. We were doing that design as a team member type functions. And these stories always start out in the ordinary world. And you're going to see that, like, okay, we play off of, the really recognizable versions of this from screenplays. So you're going to see Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, as well as The Matrix. And hopefully these GIFs kind of like resonate that, like, yeah, these moments, I recognize these moments, and then you can correlate it to your own experience that you're having. And for me, it was, this world of legacy IT and the status quo. We had the sneaker net, so people running CDs, flash drives, don't tell anyone. But it was a lot of manual work, and our transitions, which sounds very familiar what I heard earlier, were like measured in quarters and years. And the interesting thing was everyone thought everything was okay. Everyone was really content with this. Then DevOps and big data and all these other things started coming along, the information age, and this huge explosion of process automation and software development world, and the integrated development and test environments, and we just felt like we couldn't keep up with the change. So we had an emergency, jobs were being threatened. And then this idea that we saw from some of these patterns coming into the federal workforce, that this concept of a user developer or a product team, that hey, we could save ourselves here. And so we heard the call, but what happens is there's always this denial or refusal of the call. We can't compete with industry. We're not tech people. This is, if we train our people to do this stuff, they're going to leave us. And, we're not a technology company. We fight wars. We don't, and it won't work here. It works at Google. It's not going to work here. So it was really interesting, the denial. Even I had like self-denial on some of these things. And it really, there's something about the human experience when that call of adventure happens. There's something embedded in us that has us answer that call. And it's also a community thing. And so you meet the mentor. And there's this idea that you have these closet developers in your organization. You may not know that they're there, but when the flag is waved and the call comes, they step out. And for me, there were a lot of people through the United States Digital Service Office, the White House Presidential Innovation Fellows, and 18F. That's how I met a lot of the people on this call. And then there's, from an HR aspect, there's talent pipelines like Code for America. For the DoD, we had in our reserves, we have technologists that their day job is like DevOps engineers and things like that. We had active duty technologists that we weren't really utilizing their advice or putting them onto teams to do this. And then nonprofits and NGOs. There are nonprofits and NGOs like Defense Entrepreneurs Forum that you can really just walk into, and there's a ton of people who are ready to help. And then the next chapter is crossing the threshold. So this is where you go from the beginning into the departure in this adventure. And so for me, we chartered a team that was going to do a cloud native app, and it was more about proving the process. It was like the equivalent of publishing Hello World, but doing it cloud native. And so we built a sanctioned project under our CIO. We had a balanced team, and the way we got that balance, because we didn't have organically, we did an interagency agreement with 18F and brought in, product design and engineering consultants. And the next chapter was test allies and enemies. And we got to our first valuable iteration, but we couldn't get it out into production. We really had to figure out who our change agents were. And we really found allies in Defense Digital Service, the Air Force Chief Software Office, and a lot of the efforts that fell under there. I got the t-shirt to prove it. And we found out that our enemy wasn't like a person it was more of like a mythical creature, like the Balrog here. It was the status quo. It was bureaucracy. It was outdated policy. And it was an interesting challenge because we needed wizards and other people to face off with that to help us through those moments. And then we approached the innermost cave. So this is where, we're starting to get a sense of ourselves, but we run into cybersecurity. And we get to encounter vaporware. And this is like vaporware in the sense of like all these other projects that are going on. They're building platforms, they're doing these things, they're building environments. Everyone's telling you, use our thing and you'll inherit our controls. We'll make this easier for you and stuff like that. And then you get to that point where you need to integrate them and there's nothing. It's like it's PowerPoints of talking about what they're going to do in a year or two. And then you start to notice leadership as you start moving out. There's all these people who want to add things to what you're doing. And then you start realizing the severity of the tech debt that's out there, that, hey, we're going to need different things. We're going to need certain environments and things like that. And you start to encounter that, like, how our infrastructure is versus what it would need to be to implement this solution. And it gets pretty hairy. Then you have this ordeal. There's always this huge crisis moment where you're really facing off with the thing that threatens the life of the team. And that for us was the authorization and accreditation of our application that we were building. There were some of these cost-saving reform boards. So the chief management offices send out these mercenaries, basically, like these, if you go to Lord of the Rings, these would be like the dark horsemen coming out looking for you and trying to cancel out your existence because, explain what you're doing is cost savings. And yet we were chartered to go try to find ways to operational excellence. So it was difficult. And then the tyranny of the urgent. Everyone on our cross-functional team, when we started demonstrating technical talent, all of the places and offices where they came from, those offices started going, oh, well, we have all these other projects that we need your expertise on that were due yesterday. And so that became, keeping the cross-functional team autonomous and being able to answer commitments to each other became difficult. We eventually got to the point where even in our dev environment, we had relevant data that we were integrating into the solution, and we're starting to build business intelligence and insights for the organization. And so we really were delivering value at that point, even though we weren't out in a production environment. And we started demonstrating that potential. So there was a bit of reward. There was this thing of, we were getting kind of recognized as a force for good, and we had to answer these challenges of increased roles and responsibilities. So, instead of me just trying to explain the business logic of what the app was doing, now I'm in the boardroom explaining the implications to our accreditation process and how we have to blow it up. To people who've been doing this for 25 years, saying the way you do it isn't going to work if we want our stuff to behave this way. And even though we were successful, we had this moment of, on our journey back to the known, we were like bad rebels. We kind of had this hubris about us that we know better than these policy wonks, we know better than the frozen middle. And that was a terrible attitude to have, because if the point was to prove to the organization we should be using product teams and organizing around these workflows and value streams, and you should be allowing them to be autonomous, we were getting a bad reputation for just being jerks in some ways and doing our own thing. And that was terrible for the point that we were trying to prove. So we had to have this a moment of humility and really coming back and trying to reintegrate into the organization and be something that was more desirable as a team, a mode of work. And so there's this moment of resurrection, and we had to do what was impossible. And for us, that was really, we ended up having to refactor our app several times because, we had legitimate challenges from the cybersecurity folks and the environments and those interdependencies. And so as opportunities would open up to actually get our application to production, it encouraged huge amounts of rework and refactoring things and stuff like that. And the team really came together, and it was incredible that, we did what was impossible. It seemed like there were a lot of people rooting against us, and we ended up showing them and proving them what we were capable of. And then a lot of people, that kind of tipping point where we believe in ourselves and others believe in the team. And we hit that moment where we could start sustaining success. And so there's this moment of returning with the Elixir. And, there were certain people who rewarded. I mean, literally there was a command that had a cake, and they celebrated because it was just, life was going to be easier for them. The app provided a lot of lifecycle management type data and things like that. But as you can see from these different kinds of stories, the returning with the Elixir isn't always joyous. Sometimes the team moves on to the next level. Sometimes they retire. Sometimes they spin off other teams. In this particular case, for our team and what we did, it was much more Lord of the Rings style, where, as a team, the things we went through and the horrors that we saw, we were retired, and some of us were just moving off to exile with the elves kind of situation, which isn't bad in itself. It just shows that there are different patterns to how you get closure and how you iterate to the next part of the story. So this kind of gets to the Q&A and the inflection point. And so, looking at that clock, those icons in it, who are you in this journey? Are you the captain of the ship? Are you the mentor and teacher? Are you that person that's going to step in when that product team or that agile team hits the ordeal, and you're going to take a blowtorch and do bureaucracy hacking and get them through that threshold and get them to the point where they're on the return? Are you like an NGO, like the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum, where you're just the network in the middle, that you just have a sense of where other teams are in this journey and you can route them, to that? I give, Brian a lot of credit that he is an awesome network person who just knows how to link people up and help each other learn from each other. And that's, when does the student become the teacher? And I would say as soon as you get through a digital talent reskilling or a DevOps digital transformation, as soon as a team gets through one of these chapters, they know enough to start teaching that chapter to the people who are coming behind them. And, that's exactly what I'm doing here. This is, as soon as we got through this, Brian was coaching me to you need to share this story. There are people who are trying to do this right now, and they're trying to look at where to get people for their team. and sometimes we're overlooking our own organization. And you'd be really surprised. We found really amazing people that, based on their descriptions and stuff like that, they would not be who you're looking for. They can come from marketing, they can come from HR, and they can come from, you know, the logistics and sustainment, you know, and they become amazing like digital practitioners in these teams because they understand empathy, they understand customer service and being, you know, user-centered, and they just become great teammates. And so it's not always an IT thing on that. And so I'll stop there. Again, I dropped a link with this. You're all more than welcome to cruise through it and get a hold of me if you want to talk more about it. Really appreciate everyone giving us the time this morning to come together. I love these events. Again, it's all about telling the story and learning from each other, because it does decrease the burden, and it does help us, you know, keep the lawn mowed, so to speak.
Yeah, Jeremy, thanks for that. There's a question from Karen. What determines if an agency opts into your work?
Could you ask that again?
Yeah, what determines if an agency opts into your work, into the efforts there within the Marine Corps?
So an agency external to the Marine Corps, whether they opt in or not, the determination for that usually is it's not free, even though we're the government and we're not for profit. There is usually, I would say, the critical factor is understanding how to function the interagency agreement, and that it has to be a win-win, that both sides, both agencies need to be getting something out of that work. And typically it's some kind of unique thing or perspective or data or something like that. We've seen inside the Department of Defense, we've seen a lot of cross-service, just kind of goodwill work across, because we have so much similarity. We haven't seen a lot of interagency work outside of what we did with 18F. And so that it is difficult, but I think if you can find people in agencies that have a similar use case and similar data domains, so if like finance or logistics or, you know, HR and things like that, and you're having troubles working through, you know, privacy and data and things like that, you can team up with other agencies to kind of, hey, can we create a playbook, and can we kind of create a pattern to where, you know, our accreditation and verification validation officials would accept, you know, if we do these things this way, that they would give us some kind of format to audit ourselves or get a third-party audit, so that way we can speed this up. Or even for us, the big one was that auditing. So it's like, I'll audit you if you audit me, kind of stuff, and trying to create, you know, where you buy that cost down or the availability. I hope that answers the question. It's super difficult, and it's a really good question to think about, like, how do you get people into that? And again, think about telling these stories, and how do you get those people to answer that call?
Absolutely, Jeremy. Thanks for that. Any other questions? If there are any other questions for Jeremy, feel free to. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
So your slide about kind of growing the scope of the team that's collaborating and the roles that are involved there. Do you have some more resources on that you could point me to? I sent it to my boss and he got really excited. So,
so what are you looking for? In terms of
articles, or maybe some context on where you got that slide from?
So which one are you talking about?
That's the one where you kind of have the scope going from waterfall to I screen capped it. Let me see here.
The Amplitude
waterfall to the product team.
Yeah. So Amplitude, they provide consulting services, and they also have some products that do some different kind of cloud services and cloud service offerings. I rep that off of something that they put out public facing. I can see if I can find the link for you. If you send me here, I'll drop my email in here.
Cool, thanks.
And just send me an email, and I'll try to get you the original link to it. And again, I think you can talk to a lot of folks in the DevOps kind of space, especially in federal government, that we all recognize this pattern of balanced team. So, design, engineering, and product. And product is really like that business side of the team. So you have to understand that when there's conflict and, hey, we have a problem that we're trying to solve, there are always these conflicts about like the technical implementation and things like that. And when there is like headbutting about, the design, the technical implementation, typically what's good for the business and what solves the problem should win that argument. But it's a balanced team that like those roles and the people who lead in those roles share that decision, and that they get to make those decisions versus like external to that team, some architect or some CIO or some accreditation official. If they start telling the team how they're going to implement or what they're going to do, their stories, like, oh, we're going to give you the features, but then we're also going to give you your stories. Now just go do the work. That is dysfunctional, and it tends to lead to low productivity and lower lead times because you can't prescribe the tools always. If you're not going to give people training and experience, then you try to prescribe to them the way. And so that's the other thing that we've learned is that build your policies around the safe tools that your people already know how to use, and then iterate on it. Like if you find better and newer tools, then incorporate that into your policies, but don't try to like go buy something or copy some other organization and force your people to adopt that because it worked for the other organization. So, and that's the other thing is that the teams and the dynamics is what you want to see the same, but you're not going to see the same tools and techniques across teams.
Jeremy, thank you so much. Chris, you all set on your end? I think we're going to hand the conch shell your way, sir.
Yeah, let me get the screen sharing. Everyone see that okay?
Yeah, I'll just do a quick introduction for you. So for everyone on the line, Chris works with a really interesting organization within NOAA. Folks may be aware that, NOAA does weather. So a lot of the APIs that, the apps on your phone work because of the data collected and disseminated through NOAA. But Chris works with the Space Weather Prediction Center. And it's one of the few instances in the federal government where science is operationalized, and some of the impacts of their work. They essentially have a number of sensors, including even sensors over at USGS that's analyzing the sun constantly. And they're looking to predict if anything from an EMP or anything else is going to kick off from the sun and create issues for satellite comms, electrical networks, etc. So they have folks that are essentially doing space weather prediction, and they're up in Boulder, Colorado. And so that's who Chris works with. So Chris, go ahead.
All right. Yeah, so moving from Agile to DevOps with a small team. This is our story of not wholeheartedly going DevOps, but kind of inching that way iteratively with our team of about 9 developers. We've got a couple Linux admins, or one Linux admin and 2 Windows admins that we collaborate with occasionally, but they're not really part of the team. So that's kind of the makeup of our organization. And to point out, during this, I'm product owning, I'm a senior developer, and I'm also trying to drive the application architecture. So one of the takeaways is get comfortable with wearing a lot of hats when you're going through this kind of change, I guess. And let me get my slides advancing. So the Space Weather Prediction Center, briefly about us, Brian kind of talked about what we do, but we're buried pretty deep under agency bureaucracy, under Commerce, NOAA, Weather Service, National Centers for Environmental Prediction, and under that, they have like the Hurricane Center and us, the Space Weather Prediction Center. And we have a different subject area than some of those parent agencies. It's not in common. So that's good in that we get to innovate, and it's bad in that we don't get handed a lot of enterprise solutions that do exactly what we do. And we're a FSMA high system, mostly for just system resilience and always being up to help satellite launches, give go no goes, and astronaut space missions in space, spacewalks, that kind of stuff. So no cloud, they said. That'd be getting a little scary for us. So stay on premise, stay safe as we know it. But it is a cool mission. We got 93 million miles between the sun and the earth that is our domain, and that includes everything leaving the sun surface all the way to hitting the mud here on earth. So pretty interesting place. And federal government, right, mission is what really lights the fire, makes all this stuff possible. So a little bit of background. First, we went Agile back in 2012, and I get a lot of questions about this. So what we did was we sent all of our developers to Scrum Master training. Here's Scrum, here's how it works, here's the values, here's the roles, here's some tools. And then we found a project that really required building a team consensus and organization consensus. Because before this, it's all silos, right? So our new website, everyone's got an opinion about the website. Let's use Agile to resolve all that into what we should do. So 8 years later, we've been doing 2-week sprints. We've evolved the team a bunch of times. But we really take that Agile manifesto value of customer collaboration over contract negotiation as super important. So we're trying to work as closely with our scientists and our forecasters as we can. It's not easy. It's always a challenge, but it's worth doing. And we're just inching along that diagram that I asked a question about earlier to bringing them closer onto the team. So we done this. We saw some big improvements in morale and our capability. It was time to improve delivery. We were starting to get stuck on our architecture. So here's the challenge we were facing. We have this giant Microsoft SQL Server production database. We get all the data in there, and then maybe you have some views and stored procedures to get it out for the applications, but everything's talking straight to the database. So it's all tightly coupled to the database. And there's all this business logic about resolving all these different kinds of data into something simple, which means you've got all this in the database. Maybe some of y'all can see the problem already. But so there's no service layer, there's crons, so it's not very event driven, and when you're going to try to figure out where things are running is hard. So this deep coupling was really killing our agility. If you wanted to change something, you really had to understand almost the entire database. So you almost had to understand everything to make sure you weren't going to break it. And how do you get started with continuous integration with this? You know, if you wanted to stand up a whole system to test, databases are notoriously difficult, and that's the central piece of our architecture. As a developer, how do you get something that captures what production looks like on your development environment? So that was our challenge. So we started to seek out a new way. We took some Jenkins training to start to learn continuous integration. And this was our first exposure to Docker. So this was in August 2017. Ryan Blunden, who now works with SourceGraph, I think, came and showed us Jenkins, and he did it with the Docker tooling. And we thought, oh, that looks cool. Containers, we can capture all these dependencies. We can put them all in our environment. But how do we do this with what we've got? So we labeled what we were doing, which is shared database integration. Martin Fowler, who's a prominent, famous software architect, says some pretty nasty things about shared database integration. And I think we're coming to see that a lot of the things he says ring true with us. So I read a book on a new way, Sam Newman's Building Microservices. And this really teaches the architectural principles of loose coupling and high cohesion, so that you can kind of check out a part of a system and develop that independently. I highly recommend that book if you're thinking about changing your architectural style, even if it's not going to be microservices. It's got some good lessons in it. And then I presented kind of the old way and the new way to our developers and got a lot of buy-in into trying the new way. People were very excited to try something different. Like we were all frustrated for different reasons. So we were ready to go. And we got to play with Docker a little bit over the holidays. And then in the spring, we found a small project, but really high value, important milestone called the verification service. We're going to take observations of space weather and check them against our forecasts and see how good our forecasts are doing. And then we split our team, which was too large. We had probably 9 or 10 people. We split it in two to work. One to keep working on the database because that's not going away yet. And then another to just throw away everything and work this new way on this verification service. And around this time, we got Slack to improve the collaboration between the new team members. And we started to develop this verification service with the new rules. So here's the new rules. Only one thing, the service talks to a database. So as we architected this system, we kept drawing a line back to a database or the database. And every time we did that, we said, no, rule number one, we're not going to do that anymore. So we got a service. Everything else talks to the service. The service can talk to a backend store, right? So it's service oriented. We're going to do that loose coupling and high cohesion. We're going to be friendly to continuous integration, and we're going to try end-to-end testing. We're going to be able to stand up every component of the system, including a database, drop some data into the ingest part or wherever that is, do some processing, store it in the database, and then query it to make sure we have the right results. And we're going to do that with every commit, fully automated. And we're going to do event driven because low latency wasn't important for this project, but it's important for pretty much everything else we do. So might as well learn it here. And 12factor.net became a new place where we could start for best practices, especially store configuration in the environment. That one is one from the applications perspective, really helps with standing things up automatically or in your dev environment, or any way you want to deploy a container, cloud, Kubernetes, Docker Compose, whatever. If your config is coming from the environment, you're in good shape. And since we're doing this anyway, let's try a whole bunch of new stuff. So we're going to go NoSQL. We're going to try MongoDB for a more developer-friendly way of developing a backend database. We're going to do Python Flask for RESTful gets and posts. And we started to choose Python and consolidate on Python 3 because a lot of our scientists already know Python. When they're dabbling in code, it's in Python. So let's bring that collaboration. Let's make that more possible. And we're going to go with asynchronous messaging. That's highly recommended by that book I was alluding to earlier. We're going to use RabbitMQ here specifically for loose coupling. So this is publish subscribe, where a service, if it does something, can publish that it did something, and then something downstream can listen for that without the publishing service knowing what it's using it for. And that can be very low latency, which is really cool. And we're going to put everything in a Docker container because we really like containers and capturing those dependencies. So how did it go? Well, it was amazing. The developers were really excited to learn all this new stuff and to just sidestep all the old problems. The pace of learning was very rapid. Checking something out to make an iterative change, it was so much faster than it used to be, because maybe you even had your dev environment laying around still, but even if you didn't, it might only take an hour, where before it might take a week to figure out how to run something locally. And the customer was absolutely thrilled with what we built with this verification service, something they could query, something that was low latency. And he was comparing this to our partner office. The UK Met Office has a space weather system with verification that had always been better than ours. And now we were faster and leaner and neater and cooler. So he was able to brag. But at the beginning of this, he was terrified, right? We're going to try a new way on your project. He was terrified. So we won him over by delivering. And that's a pretty important message, I think. And we also discovered that it was faster to learn all this new stuff and deliver than it was to deliver in the old system. So we got all this learning for free. Really cool. But, and there's always a but, this microservices team with all this rapid learning got way ahead of everyone very quickly. So we lost the other software developers. They couldn't even understand what we were talking about. The ops team never quite, those sysadmins never quite found the cycles to keep up with this either. The continuous integration test, one of the points of doing this whole architecture, quickly got ignored. Whoops, because we didn't put any alerting in there. So when someone broke the build, usually the software still worked and the tests didn't. The developers just kind of like, well, it's not really working. They kind of wrote it off. So whoops, we missed that one. And it became, we found it was very difficult to build our containers on secure networks. Well, we figured that out. That's pretty obvious solution. So the next step's got a little bit hard. How do you choose an orchestrator? What do we do about this testing issue? And we had some security failures. Nagios is hard to secure, and we gave it too much access to the Docker daemon, so don't do that. And Jenkins, which we set up during that training course, we left those settings. We didn't, when we started using it for real, we didn't lock it down. So make sure your Jenkins is locked down. So we did that. We locked Jenkins down. No more Nagios monitoring through the Docker daemon. We adopted Harbor as our software Docker image repository. So now we can build on our dev, like on our own virtual machines, or we can build with CI. Either way, we're no longer building on staging or production. We're just pulling that image across. So that's been awesome. We love that. And then we started to really socialize the benefits of containers. So we gave some presentations to scientists and kind of showed them how we were working and helped them learn how to use it. And also with the ops team and management to a lesser extent. And containers became the new way. So now everything we write up with this team, of course we're going to put it in a container. It's just easier and cooler. It makes those deployments almost push button. And we got some new signs of hope lately. So we delivered some very complicated systems to production very quickly. We had 3 space weather models, which needed to be turned around and made production ready very quickly. And we were able to do that with this workflow. And we had to replace our old GOES 14 and 15 feed with the GOES 16 satellite feed. And the data is kind of different. And when we did this, we were able to break that tie to the database and go to a service instead everywhere we used GOES data, which was expensive to touch all these latency applications, but we're starting to move around that old shared database pattern. And that's how we're kind of strangling the old way of doing it. And we're really loving that, even though, you know, we are having to work in Microsoft Access or whatever. At least we're doing it the new way. The IT security guys interested in container scanning. So we got Claire. So we're starting to get some ops interest. Ops team lead asked, are you guys using Kubernetes? So it's coming from the other angle. Our Linux admin is starting to use containerized versions of his apps. So that's really cool. And we brought in some people from the other team and added them to our team, and we had a new hire, and we taught them a little bit of Docker, and then they were able to do, you know, understanding the values of the architecture. They're able to put code in production this way very quickly. We were really impressed with how much we shortened that learning curve as we wrote down the rules of how to deploy the way we're deploying now. I also, a little bit of shameless self-promotion, gave some of the more technical specifics of this journey at a DockerCon talk, which ended up being very popular, got a great reception. So you can go to dockercon.com and look at predicting space weather with Docker if you want to know a little bit more about the technical side of this journey. And now we're also collaborating with NASA. They set up a joint cloud test bed, and they're kind of taking our lead on like how do we deploy stuff at SWPC. We can just set up an environment where we can do that since it's much more straightforward now. So some next steps, so we've got to get a new rule where all of our images are built on staging and production. All of our images on staging and production must be built by continuous integration. So we've got that automated tooling somewhere in the process in between dev and deploy. We got to centralize our logging. We still need to adopt an orchestrator. We didn't like Docker EE. Now we're trying K3S. The ops team might go Pivotal or VMware or OpenShift. And we're going to try to containerize as much old stuff as we can as our operating systems get closer to end of life. We're going to just keep pushing on cloud. It is hard to build all this DevOps tooling on-prem. If we just had cloud, a lot of this stuff we'd have some good patterns to start with. So just a shout out to my team. Here they are. We really enjoy working with this stuff. They really get a lot out of me talking about it. So thanks for having me.